Welcome back to Night Creepypasta Rules. Tonight, step inside Blackwood Manor, where silence has rules. Dinner is set for the dead, and time itself obeys a different master. Trust the house, or vanish beneath it. Old houses don't just hold memories. They enforce them with rules etched into the silence. And Blackwood Manor whispered its first commandments the moment I stepped across the threshold. The humid savannah air clinging to me like a shroud. They say history breathes in this city, sighing through the Spanish moss that drips like green lace from the ancient live oaks, exhaling the scent of damp earth, salt water, and secrets left undisturbed for centuries. Blackwood Manor, set back from the avenue on acres of overgrown, shadowed grounds, felt less like it was breathing and more like it was watching, waiting, holding a lungful of stagnant air behind its peeling Palladian facade. My name is Eleanor Vance, Ellie to the few who know me well enough. Architectural historian, restoration consultant, currently employed to catalog, analyze, and perhaps somehow recommend a path forward for this magnificent decaying beast. The Blackwood Project was the kind of commission scholars dream of. Untouched for decades, shrouded in local legend, a potential treasure trove of antebellum history and Gothic extravagance. For me, it was also a chance at redemption, a project demanding the meticulous attention to detail I'd failed to provide on the disastrous garrison renovation back in Charleston, a failure measured in collapsed plaster ceilings and lawsuits. This time, no detail would be overlooked, no structural quirk ignored, no instruction unheeded. He was waiting on the deep-shaded veranda, seemingly impervious to the oppressive August heat that had me sweating through my linen shirt before I even reached the top step. Mr. Elias Thorne Blackwood IV, the last scion of the family, looked as weathered and etiolated as the peeling white paint on the massive columns flanking him. Tall, gaunt, dressed in slightly too formal, faded seersucker, with eyes the color of weak tea that seemed to hold the same dusty stillness as the air inside the house. Miss Vance, he greeted, his voice a soft, low-country drawl, smooth, but without warmth. Welcome to Blackwood Manor. She requires significant attention, as you'll see. He led me inside. The air hit me first. Cool, unnaturally so, despite the lack of modern air conditioning, carrying the scent of dust thicker than velvet. Lemon oil applied long ago, decaying paper, and something else, something subtly floral but funereal, like dried wreaths. The entrance hall was vast, dark wood, swallowing the light filtering through the grimy fanlight above the door. A massive grandfather clock stood silent against one wall, its pendulum still. The tour was brief, almost perfunctory. Blackwood pointed out key architectural features with detached precision, but skirted around entire sections of the house, waved away questions about locked doors, structurally unsound, and seemed particularly keen to move quickly past the enormous, shadowy dining room, where the long mahogany table gleamed faintly under a layer of dust. Except, I noted with a prickle of unease, for 4 distinct place settings, complete with tarnished silverware and clouded crystal, arranged as if awaiting guests who never arrived. Finally, back in the echoing entrance hall, he pressed a heavy ornate iron key into my hand. You'll reside in the former housekeeper's suite, East Wing, he said. Adequate, I believe. Running water, rudimentary electricity. I reside in the gatehouse. Do not expect frequent visits. The house prefers quiet. He paused, his gaze drifting upwards towards the high, shadowed ceiling where intricate plasterwork crumbled. A soft, distinct creaking sound came from directly above us, like slow, heavy footsteps on bare wood. Blackwood's eyes remained fixed forward. He didn't acknowledge the sound at all. There are, he continued, his voice dropping slightly, certain eccentricities, Protocols learned through generations, necessary for peaceful cohabitation. Previous caretakers who adhered to them found their tenure manageable. Those who did not, he let the sentence hang, unfinished. He produced a small handwritten card from his jacket pocket. "The house rules," he stated simply. I took the card. The handwriting was elegant, archaic script. 1. Should footsteps be discerned from overhead after nightfall, pay them no mind. There is no accessible upper floor. My historian's brain immediately jumped to hidden attics, sealed off servants' quarters. Logical explanations, yet the absolute certainty in Blackwood's tone. The way he still refused to glance upwards. It felt less like structural advice, and more like a warning against acknowledging the impossible. To her, the dining table requires 4 place settings be maintained in perpetuity, whether diners are anticipated or not. Ensure this is attended to daily before dusk. My gaze flickered towards the shadowed dining room doorway. The 4 settings, not leftovers from a past event. A requirement. Bizarre. Ritualistic, almost. Appeasement. For whom? 3. The grandfather clock in the main hall keeps its own time. Should it chime 13 times consecutively at any hour, seek immediate concealment beneath the dining room table. Remain silent. Hold your breath until the resonance fades completely. 13 chimes. Hide under the table. This sounded like pure Gothic fantasy, the stuff of the novels I devoured. Yet, standing here in the palpable silence, the oppressive weight of the house settling around me, a chill traced its way down my spine that had nothing to humid air. I thought of my past mistake, the detail I overlooked. This time, I would follow every instruction, no matter how strange. I understand, I said, forcing professional calm into my voice. Blackwood gave a curt nod, his expression unreadable. Very good. My number is on the card. For true emergencies regarding the structure only. The house provides for its own other needs. Without further ceremony, he turned and let himself out the massive front door, leaving me alone in the echoing silence. The first few days in Blackwood Manor were a disorienting blend of meticulous work and creeping unease. I threw myself into the task, establishing a base in the surprisingly well-preserved housekeeper's suite in the East Wing. A small, self-contained world of slightly less oppressive silence compared to the echoing grandeur of the main house. My routine became my shield. Hours spent photographing intricate plasterwork, measuring warped floorboards, carefully cataloging peeling wallpaper samples. The rhythmic tap and click of my laser measure, a small defiance against the stillness. But the house intruded, not aggressively, not at first, just persistently. Doors I knew I'd closed would be found slightly ajar. Tools left on a table would appear shifted mere inches overnight. And the cold spots. They were pervasive, drifting through rooms like unseen currents, raising goosebumps on my arms. In the otherwise stifling savannah heat. Protocol Alpha, I reminded myself constantly, focusing on the explainable. Drafts in a poorly sealed old house. Convection currents. Yet, the cold often lingered near specific objects. The silent grandfather clock, the threshold of the locked dining room, the ceiling of the main study. My research into the Blackwood family archives. Stacks of ledgers and journals found in the dusty, book-lined study offered fragmented glimpses into their world. Elias Thorne Blackwood I, the patriarch who built the manor in the early 19th century, obsessed with astronomy and esoteric philosophies. His wife, Lenore, prone to melancholia. 2 children, Isabel and Thomas, whose presence faded abruptly from the later journals. Tragedies were hinted at, glossed over with formal, evasive language. There were mentions of additions, renovations, structural changes, particularly concerning the upper levels, that seemed incomplete or strangely documented. It was during one late evening session in the study, Poring over Elias Blackwood's spidery handwriting detailing calculations for celestial alignments, that Rule 1 became unavoidable reality. The house was utterly silent. The only sound the low hum of my laptop and the distant chorus of cicadas outside. Then, a distinct, slow, heavy tread sounded on the wooden floor directly above my head. I froze, pen hovering over my notes. Every rational explanation flooded my mind. Possum in the roof crawl space, water settling in ancient pipes, structural groaning, but the sound was too specific, too rhythmic, pacing back and forth. The sound of substantial weight on old floorboards. Rule 1. Should footsteps be discerned from overhead after nightfall, pay them no mind. There is no accessible upper floor. Blackwood's flat voice echoed in my memory. No accessible upper floor. My blood ran cold. I forced my gaze down, staring intently at the complex astronomical charts, heart hammering against my ribs. The urge to look up, to search for a non-existent trapdoor, an impossible staircase, was almost overwhelming. My meticulous historian's mind rebelled against theological constraint. Document everything. But the primal fear, amplified by the house's palpable atmosphere and Blackwood's grave warning, held me rigid. The footsteps continued their slow, measured pace overhead, back and forth, directly above my desk. Then a fine cascade of white plaster dust drifted down from the ceiling, landing silently on my open journal, on my keyboard. Tangible proof, not just sound. Something was up there, heavy enough to disturb century-old plaster. I didn't move, didn't breathe, until the footsteps finally faded, moving away towards the far side of the house, leaving only the oppressive silence and the fine layer of dust confirming what I'd heard. I didn't sleep in the housekeeper's suite that night. I huddled in an armchair in the main library downstairs, doors locked, listening to every creak and groan until the first gray light of dawn. My phone signal was patchy at best within the manor's thick walls. It took several tries to get through to my sister, Beth, back in Atlanta. Ellie, finally. I was starting to worry. How's the spooky southern mansion? Her cheerful voice crackled through the weak connection. It's impressive, I said, trying to sound normal, professional. Lots of work. Structurally fascinating. Some water damage in the west wing I need to assess. Just water damage. You sound weird. Everything okay? How could I explain? The footsteps, the rules, the dust falling from a ceiling connected to nothing. Just tired. I lied. Long hours. And the humidity here is killer. Uh-huh, she said, unconvinced. Well, don't let the ghosts get you. Call me properly when you get into Savannah for supplies, okay? The line crackled and died before I could reply. The isolation felt suddenly absolute. That evening, heading back towards my suite after a long day, measuring damp patches, I passed the grand hall. I glanced towards the silent grandfather clock, its polished wood seeming to absorb the dim light. Then, my gaze fell on the massive dining room table, visible through the open doorway. 4 place settings still gleamed faintly in the dusk. Rule 2. Maintain 4 place settings in perpetuity. Another bizarre instruction I needed to follow to maintain this fragile, unsettling peace. Weeks settled into a tense rhythm. Document by day, research by night, sleep fitfully in the small suite. Always listening. I learned to ignore the phantom footsteps overhead, though the fine layer of dust reappeared on my desk each morning. I worked late in the study, a silent, recurring validation of Rule 1. The research deepened my fascination and my dread. Elias Blackwood. His journals grew more erratic in his later years, filled with cryptic references to thinning veils, necessary alignments, and the quartet's eternal supper. Lenore, his wife, wrote poetry, filled with imagery of empty chairs and silent listeners. The children, Isabel and Thomas, vanished entirely from the family records after a documented outbreak of yellow fever in Savannah. Yet hushed local legends spoke not of illness, but of a tragic accident within the manor itself. Something swift in the manor itself. Something swift and terrible, often whispered about in connection to the dining room. Rule 2 became a daily ritual, performed with a mixture of absurdity and superstitious fear. Each evening before dusk, I'd enter the cavernous dining room. The air here was always colder, holding the faint spectral scent of beeswax, and something that reminded me, disturbingly, of roast meat long since gone cold. The long mahogany table dominated the room, its surface reflecting the dim light like dark water. And the four-place settings, heavy, ornate silver, intricate china patterns, leaded crystal goblets, sat waiting. I checked them, straightened a fork, dust a plate, ensuring their silent vigil continued. It felt like tending a shrine to forgotten diners, appeasing whom? The quartet mentioned in Elias's journal. The family of four, one sweltering afternoon, after hours spent mapping severe water damage in the West Wing attic access point, which confirmed structurally there was absolutely no second floor accessible above the study. I was exhausted, frustrated, my meticulous plans hindered by crumbling infrastructure. The Savannah heat pressed in, thick and suffocating even within the manor's stone walls, dragging myself back to my suite as dusk gathered. The thought of making the long trek to the dining room to check on four-place settings for non-existent ghosts felt infuriatingly pointless. It's ridiculous, I thought, collapsing onto my bed, just old wives' tales. How settling, overactive imagination, fueled by exhaustion and a surge of defiant rationality. I made the decision. Tonight, I wouldn't set the table. Tonight, the quartet could fend for itself. I'd left my own lunch plate there earlier. One setting would have to do. The house remained quiet as full night descended. I worked on my laptop in the suite, reviewed photos, typed up structural reports, pointedly ignoring the dining room ritual. A sense of smug satisfaction warred with a low-level hum of anxiety. See? Just superstition. Around 10 p.m., it started. Subtle at first. A distinct creak from the hallway floorboards outside my suite door, though I knew I was alone in this wing. Then, a soft scrape from the room above the suite. Impossible. That was attic space. Supposedly sealed. I dismissed them. Old house noises. Then, a loud slam echoed from downstairs, the unmistakable sound of one of the heavy oak doors in the main hall being thrown shut. My heart leaped, followed by another slam, and another. One after another, doors began to open and slam throughout the main house, a percussive cacophony echoing through the vast empty spaces. Fear, cold and sharp, replaced my earlier defiance. This wasn't settling. This was activity, Poltergeist activity, textbook style. Triggered undoubtedly by my failure to set the table. As I sat frozen, listening to the distant chaos, the sound of silverware scraping violently against china erupted from the direction of the dining room. It was loud, frantic, accompanied by a chorus of low, overlapping whispers, indistinct but filled with cold anger and despair. Then came a sharp crash from the hallway just outside my suite, like pottery shattering. Okay, point taken. Scrambling off the bed, heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight and ran from the suite, down the corridor towards the main house. The door slams continued. The whispers from the dining room seemed to swirl around me as I ran past its open doorway, the air inside frigid. In the main hall, a large porcelain vase lay shattered on the marble floor near the staircase. I didn't slow down, reaching the dining room sideboard, fumbling in the near darkness. The power was flickering now. I grabbed 3 sets of the heavy silverware, 3 plates, 3 crystal goblets, My hands shook so badly I almost dropped them. Rushing back to the table, I quickly, frantically, laid out the other 3 place settings opposite my own lunch plate. The instant the final silver fork clattered onto the polished wood beside the 4th plate, the house fell utterly silent. No door slams, no whispers, no scraping silverware, just absolute profound silence, broken only by my own ragged gasping. The power stabilized. I stood there, trembling, in the middle of the vast cold dining room, staring at the 4 perfectly set places at the head of the table, awaiting their spectral guests. The rule wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't appeasement. It wasn't appeasement. It was a mandate, and the house itself enforced it. Slowly, I backed out of the room, not wanting to turn my back on the empty chairs. In the main hall, I carefully stepped around the shards of the broken vase. My eyes were drawn to the grandfather clock against the far wall. Still silent. Still stopped. But it seemed taller now. Darker, radiating a cold potential I hadn't felt before. Rule 3. What happened when that one triggered? I didn't want to find out. The house settled into a new phase after the dining room incident. Not calm exactly, but watchful, compliant now. I performed the Rule 2 ritual meticulously each evening, the absurdity overshadowed by the memory of flying pottery and spectral whispers. The Rule 1 footsteps overhead became a nightly occurrence, a heavy pacing tread I learned to ignore with forced detachment, though the fine dust still appeared on my desk each morning like a mocking signature. My psychological state frayed. Sleep offered little respite, filled with dreams of empty dinner parties and footsteps circling my bed just beyond the edge of sight. Isolation pressed in. My brief, staticky calls with Beth felt increasingly strained. How could I explain my reality? Hey sis, had to set the table for ghosts again last night, otherwise the house throws things. She'd have me committed. I stopped calling as often, retreating into my research, into the manor's decaying embrace. The research became obsessive. I needed to understand the why behind the rules. The Blackwood family, Elias I, Lenore, Isabel, Thomas, the quartet. Their deaths remained shrouded. The official records showed yellow fever claiming the children. Lenore dying years later of melancholia. Elias I living into old age, becoming increasingly reclusive. But the dates felt wrong. Conflicting entries in Elias' later journals spoke of Lenore and the children still being present long after their supposed deaths, mentioned setting places for them, spoke of time feeling unstitched within the manor walls. And the clock, it appeared frequently in Elias's later, almost indecipherable notes. Not just a timepiece, but a regulator, a conduit. Diagrams showed complex celestial charts, notes about harmonic resonance, 13th hour conjunctions, and boundary stabilization protocols. It seemed the clock wasn't just telling time. It was somehow managing it, or managing something within it, tied to the house, the family, the lingering presence. Rule of 3 wasn't just about hiding from a passing ghost. It sounded like hiding from a scheduled, potentially catastrophic event. One passage, scrawled in a trembling hand, chilled me to the bone. The 13th chime unbinds. Resonance cascade. Only silence beneath the oak offers sanctuary. Must hold breath against the passage. Silence beneath the oak. The heavy oak dining table. As October deepened, turning the savannah air crisp and cool, the house grew restless again. The footsteps overhead became heavier, more erratic. Cold spots intensified, sometimes manifesting with the faint, chilling sound of children laughing, quickly stifled. Objects near the dining room would be found slightly askew each morning, and the grandfather clock, its pendulum still for months, began to swing, almost imperceptibly at first, then with more conviction, though the hands remained frozen. It felt like something winding up, gathering energy. I found the specific date referenced multiple times in Elias I's most frantic notes, tied to an obscure astronomical alignment occurring tonight. October 31st, Halloween, of course. The date the journal claimed the veil thinned most dangerously, requiring careful regulation by the clock. My dread intensified throughout the day. I considered leaving, driving into Savannah, checking into a hotel. But the research, I was close to understanding something, and leaving felt like abandoning my post, like the professional failure I was so desperate to avoid repeating. Besides, where would I go? The feeling of being bound to this house, to its mystery, was stronger than ever. Night fell, heavy and unnaturally still. No wind, no cicadas, just a deep, watchful quiet. I worked in the study, ostensibly reviewing restoration plans, but really just waiting. Nerves stretched taut. I kept the dining room doors open, my eyes flicking constantly towards the silent clock in the hall. I had rehearsed Rule 3 in my mind. Clock strikes 13. Dining room. Under the table. Silence. Hold breath. Midnight arrived. The clock remained silent. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. The house creaked. Footsteps paced overhead. Slow, deliberate. I ignored them. 2:59 a.m. My breath hitched. Then from the main hall, it began. The slow, resonant chime of the grandfather clock. Deep, sonorous, each strike echoing through the silent manor like a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. My own heart pounded in time. 4, 5, 6. I pushed back my chair quietly. 7, 8, 9. Moving towards the study door, towards the hall. 10, 11, 12. It paused. The 12th chime faded, leaving a silence more profound than before. Was that it? Had I misinterpreted the journal? Boom. The 13th chime. Deeper, harsher, resonating not just in the air, but in my bones, in my teeth. It felt utterly final, like the closing of a crypt door. Rule 3. Now, I didn't run, but moved fast, down the hall, into the cavernous dining room. The four-place settings gleamed faintly in the moonlight slanting through the tall windows. Without hesitation, I dropped to my hands and knees and scrambled under the massive oak dining table, pulling myself into the deepest shadows against the far wall beneath it. I curled into a ball, pressing my face against the cool, dusty floorboards, and held my breath, listening. The final, reverberating echo of the 13th chime died away, leaving a silence so absolute it pressed against my eardrums, like a physical weight. Curled beneath a massive oak dining table, face pressed against the cool, dusty floorboards, I held my breath, muscles screaming, lungs burning. The air under the table was thick, with the scent of old wax, dust, and the faint, lingering aroma of beeswax from the Rule 2 ritual. Every nerve ending was alight, straining against the suffocating quiet. Remain silent, hold your breath, until the resonance fades completely. The rule was clear. But Elias Blackwood-Eye's journal had hinted at more, at the nature of the quartet, at the mother, Lenore, and her profound melancholy. Resonance requires reception, one cryptic line had read. Then it began, not with a sound, but a sensation. A wave of intense, unnatural cold washed into the dining room, flowing like icy water across the floor, seeping under the edges of the heavy tablecloth draped over the table's sides. It leached the warmth from the floorboards beneath my cheek, sank into my bones. My breath hitched involuntarily, held tight in my chest. Following the cold came the sound, faint at first, then clearer, of heavy fabric dragging slowly across the marble floor of the hallway, just outside the dining room entrance. It was accompanied by the soft, dry rustle of unseen garments and multiple, overlapping, sighing breaths, thin and reedy, like wind through cracked reeds. Not one presence, multiple. The quartet. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the urge to make myself smaller, invisible. The dragging sound entered the dining room, moving slowly, deliberately around the perimeter. I could feel the pressure in the room change. A heavy, palpable weight settling, making my ears ache. The cold intensified, burning now. Dust motes, disturbed by unseen passage, swirled in the faint moonlight filtering through the tall windows, visible even under the table's deep shadow. The dragging, rustling sounds circled the table. Once, twice. Slow. Measured. Like a procession, like mourners or jailers. The sighing breath seemed to probe the darkness beneath the heavy oak. Could they sense me? Could they smell my fear? My lungs burned, demanding air. Consciousness threatened to waver. Hold breath against the passage. Elias' words. But his other notes. Lenore's sorrow. The children. Resonance requires reception. Was total silence, total stillness, the only way? Or did it merely ensure passive endurance? What if reception required acknowledgement? A desperate gamble formed in my oxygen-starved brain, born of research and terror. Breaking the rule wasn't defiance. Perhaps it was communication? A change in the ritual? As the dragging, rustling presence passed closest to my hiding spot, close enough that I felt the cold intensify to a painful, needle-sharp sting. I forced my lips to move, pushing the sound out through lungs screaming for air, a bare whisper against the floorboards. Lenore. The effect was instantaneous. The dragging sound stopped. The rustling ceased. The sighing breaths hitched. The oppressive pressure in the room spiked, becoming almost unbearable. The cold focused directly above me, pressing down through the thick oak tabletop. Silence again, but different. No longer empty, but filled with a sudden, sharp, attentive quality. Did I imagine it? Or did the faint, clear tone of a single crystal goblet ring out softly from the table setting above me? A delicate, questioning chime in the absolute stillness. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had I made a terrible mistake? Invited scrutiny? Or acknowledged one, separating it from the others? Seconds stretched into an eternity. The focused cold remained, pinning me down. I could feel, more than hear, a subtle vibration through the wood above me, as if something unseen rested a hand there. Faint whispers seemed to curl around the edges of the silence now, too quiet to decipher. Questioning, agitated. Were they arguing? Reacting to the name. My lungs were bursting. Black spots danced before my eyes. I couldn't hold my breath any longer. Just as I felt my control slipping, just as I prepared for whatever consequence my gamble had wrought, the focused cold above me lifted slightly. The intense pressure lessened. Then, slowly, hesitantly, the dragging sound resumed, but different now, less processional, more uncertain. It moved away from the table towards the hallway. The rustling followed, accompanied by only 3 distinct sighing breaths now, one seemingly absent or silenced. They retreated from the dining room, the sounds fading back down the long hall. Finally, a soft, distant groan resonated through the house, like the sound of the grandfather clock's weights settling, or perhaps something sighing in relief or disappointment. Then, silence, true silence this time. The unnatural cold dissipated rapidly, leaving only the normal chill of the old house. The pressure in my ears subsided. The air felt breathable again. I didn't move. I waited, counting slow heartbeats, straining my ears. Nothing. Only the familiar creaks of the manor settling, the distant sigh of the wind picking up outside. The event, whatever it was, felt over, and somehow altered, lungs aching. I finally allowed myself a long, shuddering inhale, then another, tasting dust and relief. Cautiously, moving with infinite slowness, muscles cramping, I began to crawl out from under the heavy oak table, back into the dimly lit, silent dining room. The 4-place settings sat undisturbed, gleaming faintly. But the air felt different. The oppressive weight was lessened, replaced by a lingering sense of surprise, of a pattern disrupted. My gamble, born of desperation and research, seemed to have worked. I hadn't just hidden. I had interacted. I had perhaps rewritten one small part of the nightly ritual. The consequences remained unknown, but as I slowly, shakily got to my feet, brushing dust from my clothes, I felt a shift not just in the house, but within myself. The rules weren't immutable stone. Perhaps they were just old habits, waiting for someone to finally change the conversation. The silence that descended upon the dining room, after the presences withdrew, was profoundly different. Not the heavy, expectant stillness that preceded the 13th chime, nor the absolute void during it, but a thin, fragile quiet, like held breath, slowly released. The unnatural cold dissipated rapidly, leaving only the residual chill of the old house and the damp residue of my own terror cooling on my skin. I stayed under the massive oak table for long minutes, lungs aching, listening, only the familiar groans of the ancient manor settling around me, the distant sigh of wind in the moss-draped oaks outside. Cautiously, muscles protesting, I crawled out, emerging into the moonlit dining room. The four-place settings gleamed undisturbed on the vast mahogany surface. Nothing seemed overtly changed, yet the atmosphere felt altered, less oppressive perhaps, but also more uncertain, as if a long-established rhythm had been broken, leaving a confusing silence in its wake. My whispered utterance of Lenore had demonstrably shifted the event, silencing one of the sighing breaths, creating a hesitation in the spectral procession. I hadn't merely hidden, I had interfered. My historian's mind, now surging past the immediate fear, raced with implications. The rules weren't immutable laws. They were behavioral patterns, rituals established perhaps by Elias Blackwood, to manage the lingering presences of his family. The quartet, appeasement, avoidance. But what if acknowledgement, specific and informed, offered a different path? The next morning, armed with renewed purpose fueled by coffee, and a sleepless night spent poring over Elias's journals again, I marched down the oak-shaded drive to the gatehouse. Mr. Blackwood answered the door after a long pause, looking even more gaunt and spectral than usual in the bright morning light. His weak tea eyes widened almost imperceptibly, seeing me on his doorstep. "Miss Vance," he murmured, surprise warring with ingrained Southern politeness. "Is there a structural emergency?" "No, Mr. Blackwood," I said, keeping my voice steady, meeting his gaze directly. "There was a Rule 3 event last night." The clock struck 13. He paled slightly, gripping the doorframe. "You followed the protocol, I trust." I hid beneath the dining table, I confirmed. I held my breath. But just before the presences withdrew, I whispered her name, Lenore. The reaction was instantaneous. Blackwood flinched as if struck, his eyes darting nervously back towards the manor visible through the trees. "You spoke," he breathed, horror clear in his voice. "Shh, shh. What are you? Silence." "Absolute silence is required. That is the agreement." "What agreement, Mr. Blackwood?" I pressed, stepping closer. "The agreement Elias I made, the one detailed in his journals alongside the celestial charts and the notes on harmonic resonance. The one designed to keep the quartet in a perpetual loop of silent remembrance." He stared at me, aghast. "You read his private journals?" "I'm a historian. It's my job to research the house," I countered. He wasn't just managing grief. He was performing rituals. The four-place settings, the clock's regulation, ignoring the footsteps. It's all part of a containment protocol he designed after whatever truly happened to Lenore and the children in that dining room. Blackwood sagged against the doorframe, the fight going out of him, replaced by a weary resignation that seemed centuries old. He thought he could control it, he whispered, looking towards the manor with haunted eyes. Control them after the accident. The fever was a lie, you know. A story for the town. It was quicker than that. In the dining room, Elias blamed himself. He couldn't let them go. So he anchored them with rituals, with rules. The clock regulates the temporal resonance, keeps them looping through their tragedy, mostly contained. The footsteps are just echoes in the structure's memory. Setting the table acknowledges their presence without direct engagement. And the 13th chime, he shuddered. That's when the veil is thinnest, when their collective grief is strongest, most dangerous. Silence and stillness allow the wave to pass without drawing its full attention. But I spoke Lenore's name, I said softly, and something changed. One of them hesitated, withdrew differently. Blackwood looked at me, a strange mix of fear and morbid curiosity in his eyes. You've disrupted the harmony, he said. Upset the balance Elias maintained for decades, the balance my father maintained. And I have tried to. You don't understand what you might unleash by altering the agreement. Maybe the agreement needs altering, I replied firmly. Maybe containment isn't the answer. Maybe understanding is. He stared at me, then gave a slow, tired nod. Perhaps, he conceded, his voice barely audible. Elias wrote of resonance requiring reception. I never understood what he meant, always assumed it was madness. He straightened up slightly. But I will not be part of it, Miss Vance. My duty, passed down, is to maintain the established protocols, however flawed. What you do now is on your own head. The house, the quartet, they will respond to you now. He retreated slightly, starting to close the door. Just be careful. Some harmonies are best left undisturbed. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone on the porch. The scent of jasmine thick in the air. Blackwood wouldn't help. He was bound by tradition, by fear, but he had confirmed it. The rules weren't absolute. They were a specific, perhaps flawed, method of interaction, and I had just changed the terms. Returning to the manor, the silence felt different again. Not just watchful, but listening, curious, waiting for my next move in this strange generational negotiation with the dead. On the gleaming surface of the dining room table, where the fourth place setting sat, rested a single, pressed white gardenia, Lenore Blackwood's favorite flower, according to her letters. Months turned the humid savannah summer into a mild, golden autumn. I remained at Blackwood Manor, my work on its physical structure now inextricably intertwined with understanding its spectral architecture. The restoration proceeded slowly, carefully, always mindful of the house, sensitivities. And I navigated the haunting not just with fear, but with a cautious, informed agency. The rules, I discovered, were indeed malleable, responsive to intent and understanding rather than just blind obedience. The footsteps overhead, Rule 1, still occurred, usually late at night. But now, instead of merely freezing and ignoring them, I learned, through trial and error, guided by Elias's esoteric notes, to respond differently. Sometimes, a quiet acknowledgement worked best. Rest easy tonight, children, I might murmur, focusing on Isabel and Thomas, whose presence felt lighter, more fleeting. Other times, when the tread felt heavy, melancholic, I had addressed Lenore, perhaps reading a line from her own poignant poetry found in the archives. Often, the footsteps would pause, then gently fade, the oppressive weight lifting. Looking up remained unwise. The glimpses I caught in reflections still suggested something spatially impossible. But direct confrontation wasn't the only alternative to fearful ignorance. The dining table, Rule 2, became less a chore and more a quiet negotiation. I set the 4 places meticulously each dusk. But now, informed by Lenore's letters and Elias' journals, I added small, specific items. A perfect gardenia for Lenore, a small, carved wooden bird found in the attic for Thomas, a specific sea-polished pebble for Isabel. For Elias's setting, perhaps a copy of his astronomical charts. It felt less like appeasement and more like remembrance, acknowledging their individuality, their presence beyond the collective tragedy. The violent poltergeist activity never returned. Sometimes, entering the room, I feel a profound wave of sadness, or catch the faint scent of cigar smoke or old perfume. But it felt like memory. Rule of 3 remained the most dangerous. The 13th chime of the grandfather clock, still marking a period of intense vulnerability when the veil thinned. But I no longer just hid in blind terror. Armed with Elias' notes on resonance and sympathetic frequencies, I prepared. Before the appointed hour, which I learned to predict using the astronomical charts, I would place specific objects, iron filings, salt lines mentioned in local hoodoo practices, possibly adapted by Elias, resonant crystals, at key points near the dining room. When the 13th chime struck, I still sought refuge beneath the table, still held my breath against the initial wave of cold pressure, but I didn't remain utterly silent. I would focus, projecting quiet thoughts of peace, acknowledgement, sometimes humming a specific grounding frequency Elias had documented. The entities still passed through, their presence immense and chilling, but the passage felt less violent, less invasive, less like a violation, more like a tide receding, acknowledged but not engaged directly. Mr. Blackwood kept his distance, observing me from the gatehouse with wary curiosity. We spoke rarely, exchanging curt nods or brief reports on structural findings. He seemed content, or perhaps resigned, to let me handle the other aspects of the manor now. He was the keeper of the old ways. I was, perhaps foolishly, charting a new course. The haunting wasn't gone. The haunting wasn't gone. Blackwood Manor would never be a normal house. Cold spots still lingered, whispers echoed in empty rooms, shadows sometimes moved with unnatural speed. It required constant vigilance, constant respect, a continuous careful negotiation between the living historian and the lingering residue of the dead. Tonight, a full moon hangs heavy and silver over the moss-draped oaks, an alignment Elias I noted as significant. The house is quiet, but holds a charged energy. The footsteps begin overhead, heavier than usual. In the dining room, the crystal goblet at Lenore's setting trembles almost imperceptibly. I don't freeze. I don't run. I walk calmly to the grandfather clock in the hall. It began ticking softly weeks ago, keeping its own strange time. Placing a hand gently on its aged wood, feeling the faint vibration within, I speak softly into the quiet hall, not whispering in fear, but speaking with calm intent. Peace tonight, Elias, I murmur. The house rests. The conjunction is stable. Your family is remembered. The footsteps overhead pause. The goblet stills. The air in the house seems to sigh, a long, slow release of ancient tension. The clock ticks steadily onwards. I am still the lone occupant of Blackwood Manor, not its master, not its prisoner, perhaps its historian, its interpreter, mediating between its fractured past and uncertain present. It's not freedom, not entirely, but it is agency, earned through understanding, maintained through a fragile, evolving truce. The rules haven't vanished. They've just been revised, and the silence that follows feels, for the first time, less like waiting and more like listening. Together, thanks for listening to Night Creepypasta Rules. If this story chilled your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales every week. And remember, some rules are written in blood.